Okay, so last time we were looking at our good dead friend, St. Thomas Aquinas, talking about the theological look at animals and ethics. And now we turn to our good dead friend, Rene Descartes. A little background for Rene. He was born March 31st, 1596, in what was then known as La Haye, France. It is now named Descartes, France. So they had a place named after him. Interestingly enough, there's actually a place called LaBossiere, France. For real. You can Google it. It's a real place. I assume it's mine. And one day I'll go there to claim my place. And I assume everybody will be very happy to see me. Apparently my ancestors were asked to leave long ago. So what did Descartes do to make him famous? Well, he received an education at the Jesuit College in various stuff. He actually earned a degree in law, but of course is best known as a philosopher rather than a lawyer. And like many enterprising young men back in his time, he joined the armies to see the world and, I guess, shoot people or something. Now, his best known work is probably the Meditations on the First Philosophy, where the classic quote, famous quote, "I think, therefore I am," is made. The inspiration for that was on November 10th, 1619. He was shut in for the winter. Back in those days, people sensibly didn't fight wars during the winter because it was cold and snowy. And he had 3 vivid dreams. And according to Descartes, he received literally, like the Blues Brothers, a mission from God to solve the problems of philosophy through mathematics. And the end result was his famous Meditations on First Philosophy. Now, what ended up killing Descartes? Well, he has kind of a sad end. It started, like most sad ends, seemingly very good. He was offered the job to be the tutor of Queen Christina of Sweden. And back in the day, that was sort of the ultimate gig for a philosopher. If some, ruler, king, queen, duke, duchess, whatever, wanted you to be the philosopher. So it started off pretty good. But then when he got to Sweden, he realized that the queen was one of those super early morning people, so he had to do his lessons at 5 a.m. And it's very cold in Sweden. And the story goes that getting up early in the cold killed him. So the lesson of Descartes' life is live someplace warm and never get up too early or you will die. So good advice. Now before he died of getting up too early and being cold, he wrote a lot of stuff. In 1620, there was the Rules for the Direction of the Mind. 1633, Le Monde, which is French for the world. In 1637, the Discourse on the Method of rightly conducting one's reason and seeking the truth in sciences, shortened down just to the Discourse on the Method, and the even shorter version is just Discourses. And the shortest one is, of course, Disco. No, that part is in the back, but funny. His most famous work is the 1641 Meditations on First Philosophy. And in 1644, Principles of Philosophy was published, and his last work in 1649 was The Passions of the Soul. Now, here we'll be looking at Descartes' writing about animals. That's what we're talking about. Now, a final bit of background for Descartes, which will be important to making sense of his view about animals, is, and 0 for 2. This. Now, something we mentioned before when we talked about our good dead friend Thomas Hobbes, there are some people who are materialists, who believe that, not in the sense of like, nice stuff, but in the sense that they believe that all that exists is material. There's also dualists, and the dualists believe there's 2 types of stuff. Physical stuff, bodies, objects, etc., and then mental stuff. Literally the shell, the ghost, the body, and the mind. And Descartes is one of the most famous, or was, because he's pretty dead, most famous dualists. And he believed that each person, was a mind that had a body. And he thinks that all the thinking stuff is done here, that the mind is, and that third eye, that the mind is a thinking thing, and the body is extended but doesn't think. And this will be important for his view of animals. Now, he thinks that one very common, but perhaps forgivable error that people make is they think that animals think like we do. And the reason for this is essentially an argument by analogy, that we infer that because they are like us in these other ways, you know, they behave similar to us, they react like us, they look like us in certain ways, that they have minds as well. But Descartes thinks that that's a mistake. And what he tries to do is show why that's a mistake, and we'll see the moral implications of this. Now he claims there are two different principles of motions. How do they work? Well, again, it goes back to the dualism. There are some that are what we would call purely mechanical, what he calls corporeal. We still use that term, you know, corporeal, you know, bodies. And so the idea is that some stuff that occurs is purely physical, explainable purely in physical terms, and some is caused by, you know, the incorporeal, the ghost controlling the machine. Now, when it comes to animals, Descartes thinks this. He thinks, well, to sort of cut to the chase, we have minds, or rather our minds, and we have bodies. What about non-humans, animals? Well, his view is this. If you have a badly drawn dog, that's horrible. But all those are, all in our practice, just not paying off. So you have a badly drawn dog. And for Descartes, the dog, and on his hypothesis, is purely physical. They don't have, you know, if you ask Descartes, do dogs have brains? They sure. Do they have minds? No. Now, but someone might say, especially of their, you know, beloved pet, the dog seems, you know, their animals seem to have thought. They seem to have the appearance of thought. They do, they make sounds, they perform cunning tricks, they appear to show intelligence. So Descartes has to handle that, because they do seem to act like us. Again, it's an argument by analogy. Descartes thinks we have minds. We would infer that, well, if it's true of us, it's true of things like us. Animals like us, they get minds too. Descartes says, nope, analogy doesn't work, they haven't got minds. So what he has to do is try to prove that they don't have minds. So how does he do it? Well, he is honest enough, of course, to admit to the obvious problem. And he doesn't name it, but there's a classic problem in philosophy that's called the problem of other minds. And the problem is this. In my own case, I believe I have a mind, because I think, I feel, etc. Now the problem is, though, is that unlike Bill Clinton, I can never feel your pain. I can see you reacting. I can see you, like, you know, touch a stove and go, ah, stupid stove. But I can never actually feel your pain. So I don't know if other people have minds like I do, because I can never experience what it is to be them. I mean, I can make inferences. I would say, well, when I touched that stove, I felt pain. Person did the same thing. They seem like me. They've got minds. So normally, that's how we reason. So what Descartes has to do is try to show, while this works with other people, it doesn't work for animals. And here's how he tries to make that happen. So in a way, it's kind of a weird version of the problem. The normal problem is, how do I know other people have minds? And Descartes' version of the problem is, how do I know that animals who act like me don't have minds? Because I've seen my dog, like, grab a piece of food that's too hot and, like, react to it, which is the same way I react when I grab a piece of food that's too hot, and, well, similar. And it was really good, you know. Like, it's so tasty, but it's burning my, like pizza, you know, how you get really hot pizza with the cheese on it, and it, like, sticks to your mouth, like, oh, that was a bad decision. But it's too late, because it's stuck in your mouth and you can hear it sizzling. That's really bad. But anyways, so kind of reverse of the problem. Instead of how do I know what people have got minds, how do I know dogs or cats don't have minds? Now Descartes is honest enough to admit that we don't know for sure. You know, he does consider the problem, we don't know for sure other people have minds, and we don't know for sure if animals don't. So what he's going to do is essentially give arguments as to why they probably don't, but he's not completely certain about that. Now, the main argument is, of course, that argument by analogy. We look at our own behavior and we say, you know, I behave like this, I get a mind. My dog behaves like that, similar to me, so my dog's got a mind too. His first question of the argument is this. He says, well, he takes the easy case first. Let's get the really simple ones out of the way. Let's take like ants, caterpillars, and grasshoppers. Do they have minds?
Yes.
Do we think like, if you believe like in heaven, will heaven be full of ants and grasshoppers and, you know, ticks and fleas? Because they got minds, they get to go, you know, they get to go to heaven. And we may think, I mean, some people may think, yeah, they got minds, because they, I mean, not really like complicated ones. You know, they're not like Facebooking or anything, but maybe they have flea book. Hey, it's a really dining at a, you know, they're like yelping on dogs. 4-star dog, you know, delicious. You know, ticks, you know, good stuff. That'd be horrible. Now, anyway, I think they have minds, but do we really think that ants have minds? And the ant is like they're wondering about the universe and everything. No, so, I mean, it is fair to say maybe Descartes' wrong, that maybe those things do. But Descartes thinks, you know, this is pretty easy. It makes sense to think they don't have, you know, minds or souls. But, you know, you may not concede that to Descartes. You may say, well, ants and spiders may not have really, like, souped up minds, but you may be willing to accept they do have some type of mind. So he thinks he gets the easy stuff out of the way, but again, it may not work. People may say, well, okay, I accept, you know, grasshoppers and ticks and fleas, they've got minds. So what about more complicated animals, like horses, dogs, and cats, elephants, etc.? Well, he gives 3 arguments. First one is this. He's essentially giving, well, making use of a pretty standard method. There's a fellow named William of Ockham. And, well, the name gets spelled differently in many different ways. Sometimes it's spelled this way, you know, O-C-K-H-A-M. Sometimes it's just 2 C's. Sometimes it's razor with an O, sometimes an E. All depends. But it's easy, you know, if you just say it, it's easy, because it all sounds the same. Occam's razor, however it's spelled. And his famous saying was, do not multiply entities beyond necessity. Or put another way, keep it simple. And the idea is, and it's something that's kind of a standard in science and philosophy, if you're explaining, you know, phenomena, if one explanation requires more metaphysical stuff than the other, and they both explain the same phenomena, then the one with less stuff is better. On the principle of keep it simple. To use a very quick example, one of the standard arguments for evolution versus creationism is this. If you can explain, you know, us, you know, all the complexity of humans and other animals entirely through evolution without bringing in God, that involves less stuff. It's a simpler explanation. You have the world and critters and DNA, and in this case you got the world, the critters and DNA plus God. But this is simpler. It gets the job done. So people who accept evolution would say, this is better by Occam's razor. You don't need God. Which is kind of harsh. Other people would say, no, you can't explain everything in evolution, you gotta have God. So, and there's a lot of stabbing. It gets ugly real quick. So moving on to things that are more peaceful. So what he's going to try to do is basically use Occam's razor. If you can explain what animals do without the mind, you don't need to give them minds. So the first argument here is the bodies in motion argument, which works like this. Now, Descartes was aware, well, there's two parts to it. One is this. In the case of our just natural growth, I'll use this kind of stupid illustration. Suppose you like a cut. Do you have to wake up every morning and say, do you have to put a little post-it note on your hand saying, remember to heal wound? No, it just does that automatically. Or do you have to put a little, have an app that says, remind you, breathe now, breathe again. No, all that stuff is automatic. Although we can consciously control it. And if you think about consciously controlling, you kind of have to do it for a while because crap, now I got to think about my breathing. But then it comes back to automatic, so kind of handy. So all that stuff happens, without conscious control. So Descartes thinks, well, we have stuff that happens without us thinking about it. It doesn't need to have the mind involved. Now also here, he notes what he calls the convulsive motions of creatures. Things that they do that, one kind of horrifying example would be, everyone's heard the expression, running around like a chicken with its head cut off. They will actually do that, for real. It's pretty horrifying, because they're head comes off, blood spraying, and they're running. Just something totally wrong, but it's like zombie chicken or something. And you really don't want to eat it afterwards. You're like, I don't know if I want to eat zombie chicken. It's still good though. So, anyways. So his idea is that, if there can be motion without, conscious thought, then we can explain there are things that move without that, so we can explain it without minds. Now later, of course, people did the famous experiment where they applied electricity to a dead, frog, and its little legs would kick. And so Descartes would say, yeah, you can explain all that stuff, purely physically. So his first argument is an Occam razor one. You can explain natural movements entirely by physical phenomena. You don't need to bring in the mind. Now, interestingly enough, later thinkers brought the same argument against us having minds. There are people who are physicalists who, going back to Descartes' dualism, you get a ghosty mind, you get a physical body, and they use the same argument as Descartes. Namely, you can explain everything that the body does without the ghosty mind. So you don't need the mind. So they did to us what Descartes did to animals, saying you don't need the mind to explain that. A second argument is the automata argument. Auto from self, mata from mata. No. It basically is things that are self-moving. And today we think about things like robots and so forth, but it'd be self-moving machinery. Now, even though Descartes was writing in the 1600s, he was well aware of fairly complicated machines. We often think of the 1600s as being primitive, etc. Relative to us, it was. They didn't have Facebook or tablets. But they did have fairly sophisticated machinery. Even things today we would consider purely mechanical robots. Everyone's seen a music box. You wind it up, plays music, that type of stuff. And things that are even more complicated. So his argument is this. We can build fairly complicated machines that don't have minds, but they are self-moving. Simple example would be clockwork mechanisms. Now, jumping from Descartes' time to today, we have robots and computers and so forth. And we're essentially building mechanical creatures that we're pretty sure they don't have incorporeal minds because they're purely mechanical. But they do fairly complicated things. Your phone is a good example of a automata. It does a lot of stuff on its own. Things like Roombas, those little vacuuming robots, they're automata. And so his argument is, if we can build fairly complex machines that operate without minds, Descartes believes in God. He believes that God has created, we could say, our organic robots, God's robots. So, as he sees it, something like a dog or a cat or a sparrow or a dolphin would be a living machine created by God that doesn't have a mind. It's just purely mechanical. And God, of course, can do this because he's God. And we can build pretty complicated stuff as well. And if we can make complicated machines, God can do the same thing. And so that is, we can explain all that they do in terms of their mechanics. They're gods, as we would say today, they're gods, robots. Now again, one of the sort of ironies of this is that people who, believe in physicalism or reject dualism, they don't bring in God, of course, but they say, we're just automatons. We're just organic robots. And we don't have this ghosty mind. We are just living machines. And that's the physicalist and kind of the scientific view of us. So one of the ironies is that the arguments he uses to show animals don't have minds was later employed, also in his own time, to show we probably don't either. So if your dog's a robot, so are you. Dogbot, peoplebot. Now his third argument is probably the best of the lot, and it's the language argument. It works like this. So Descartes wants to find a clear test to show that animals don't think, they don't have minds, and we do. And he thinks the most decisive thing is the language test, that we use true language and they do not. Now, an obvious thing to say to Descartes would be, but Descartes, animals make noises. And Descartes would say, yes, of course they do. They make noises appropriately. Like the dog, dogs make a noise when they're hungry, they make noises when they're angry and happy, etc. He says that's all true. But, he claims, that's all purely mechanical. To use a modern analogy, think of, your smartphone, making announcements and noises and so forth. Is your smartphone really actually smart? Is it thinking? Do you have a person in your pocket? No, even though, it can make, some sounds, etc. at appropriate times. I mean, think of your alarm clock. If you have an alarm clock, set an alarm, it does make it a noise at an appropriate time, but you wouldn't say your alarm clock is thinking. Or like with your car, when your check engine light comes on, your car is not talking to you, it's purely mechanical. And you could rig up your car. In fact, they did. They used to have the car with the, if your door is open, the car would say, the door is ajar. The door is ajar. And people got they don't do that anymore because people got really sick of that really quick. At first it's kind of cool. My car, talks, and it's like, oh my God, it's just so annoying. And so they don't do that anymore. So the language argument works like this. So it's not making noises, because Descartes says, yeah, animals make a noise like if you shoot like a, animal, it'll make a horrible noise. Just like if you, and start ripping stuff out of your car's engine, it'll make a horrible noise, and the check engine light will probably come on. What he says is the true test is the use of true language, to what he claims is to express thought, and we consider, to sort of modernize it, it'd be to use actual language, to say things that have meaning, kind of crudely put. And he claims that that's the distinctive thing, that creatures with minds, even if they can't talk, normally, because he talks about how people use sign language, even people who are deaf and can't speak, they still use sign language.
I have a question. Can animals, as far as like pets and stuff, like wild animals, can they think?
That's a good question. Descartes would say, he says the test of thought is talking. If something can talk, use true language, then he takes that as proof that it is thinking. And so Descartes' argument would be, no, dogs and cats and squirrels don't think. Now, just because he's Descartes, he's really famous and he's really dead, doesn't mean he's right. Because, one argument, sort of the Aesop's fable argument, is that animals speak their own language, which could be possible. In the case of like dolphins, and other whales, or chimpanzees, they may have a complex enough communication. You might say, well, they don't speak like we do because they don't have the right vocal cords, but they do have language. People have taught chimps, sign language. So I might say, well, they are thinking. Another option is to say, well, to disagree with this, to say that language is not the sign of thought, but behavior. So we might say that even though my dog doesn't talk, you could look, the argument that he kind of dismisses, the argument by analogy, and say, well, the dog acts a lot like me, so if I'm thinking, my dog is thinking too. So the answer is, depends on which argument you buy. If you buy Descartes, nope, the animals don't think. If you reject Descartes and accept like a different sort of account, perhaps they do think. My own view is I think they think. I think my dog thinks. But of course I'm biased because it's my dog. I think my dog is the best dog in the world. But I agree that everybody's dog is the best dog in their world.
What kind of dog do you have?
I have a Siberian Husky, the best type of dog.
Those are the ones that look like wolves, right?
They're just like wolves. They are master escape artists, and they are rough on the little things in life. So they are cold, hard killers. They love people. Other things yeah, you don't want to keep bunnies around huskies. not that I know from experience, but they're great dogs. Plus, my husky's got 2 different color eyes, which kind of freaks people out. So. But it's not witchcraft. It's just it's just biology. I remember one time I was in the dog park and someone came up and looked at me and said, "Your dog has 2 different color eyes." She's like screaming like, "It's just normal. It's not like any superpowers or anything." It was quite a reaction. Yeah, so it depends on your view of animals. Now the language argument, interestingly enough, was later developed by a fellow named Turing. And there's a movie that came out recently that won a bunch of awards, The Imitation Game. And if you wonder, what's the meaning of the title of that movie? Well, here's the answer. Turing was kind of addressing the question of, at what point could you kind of say that a machine or a computer had intelligence, kind of. That's how people often interpret it. And so the popular version of the Turing test is that. How would you know whether we have a computer that could think? And his proposal, at least the way people interpret the proposal, is this. You would set the Turing test. You would get, today we do it probably with texting. You would take your phone and you would have A and B sending, engaging in text conversations with them. And the reason why you do it by text, because if you could see them, and you saw one was like a box of metal, you'd say, aha, I'm guessing you're the computer. And if someone else, looked like one of us, you'd say, I'm guessing you're the person. And the idea is if you couldn't tell. You're going through trying all, different things like, well, where you were born, what do you like, did you see this movie? And you couldn't tell. All the responses were, appropriate. Then that's called passing the Turing test. If a competent user of the language could not legitimately tell the difference between A and B, which one's human, which one's not, that would pass the test. And it's essentially taken from Descartes. Descartes' test is, if you use true language, you've got a mind. The way the Turing test is typically interpreted, at least popularly, is if you can, talk, pass that test, then the entity can be said to be thinking. Now, there's been several movies, of course, about the Turing test. One recent one is the movie Ex Machina, and it's about an android with a Turing test. That's it. I watched it. Pretty good. If you got Amazon, Prime or the Netflix, and you like sci-fi, then probably worth watching. Not a lot of explosions though. A little bit of violence, a lot of explosions. Normally there's be lots of explosions in a movie, but in this case, made an exception. And Michael Bay's movies, no matter how many explosions he puts in, I still don't like them. Which makes me sad, because normally I love explosions and giant robots, but I don't know. But anyways, back to the relevant thing. So that's his argument. The way you tell if something's got a mind or not is things that talk have minds, things that don't. We talk, we've got minds. Now again, a couple of problems with this is potentially that maybe things can talk that don't have minds, so we don't have minds either. Or, as was raised, maybe things that don't talk could have minds too. So a good question would be is, how does this tie into ethics? And what does Descartes think about stuff about animals? Well, kind of 2 exceptions with this. One is, if you were to ask Descartes, before he was dead, are animals alive? He'd say, sure. He doesn't deny they have life. If you were to have asked him, do animals have feelings? And he would say, yes. Now, by feelings, he doesn't mean, stuff going on in their minds, because Descartes' view is they don't have those, but he thinks feelings are physical properties in their bodies. So, interestingly, what Descartes' presenting is kind of the modern view. Because if you're a materialist, if you believe we don't have a ghostly mind, then all feelings, love, hate, desire, they are basically functions of your brain and nervous system. They're just purely physical. And so Descartes' view is animals do feel, but they're not feeling the same sense we do because they don't have, he claims, minds, but they do have bodies. So he would say they do feel. So if you ask Descartes, do animals feel pain? He would say, yes. If you asked him, do they feel pain like we do in their mind? He would say, no, because they don't have minds. So how does this tie to ethics? Well, kind of two ways. Explicitly on Descartes' view, he was responding to a view put forth long ago by a fellow named Pythagoras. He's a famous theorem guy. In addition to his mathematics, Pythagoras believed, as far as you know, in reincarnation. You you're born. And he believed that people could reincarnate as animals. And so there's a chance that if you killed an animal, that there would be a human soul in it. It could be like a relative of yours. And so the idea was it'd be a moral crime to kill animals because the souls of creatures, transmigrate. And so you shouldn't kill animals because they probably were or probably will be people. So kind of interesting, which is why many religions that have reincarnation, they're often very much opposed to killing animals or killing anything. Because whatever you killed could have been a person once, probably will be a person again. Now, a second implication of Descartes' view is that his views, the idea that animals don't have minds, influenced scientific thinking for centuries. And many justifications for using animals in experiments and mistreating them rest either explicitly or implicitly on Descartes. The idea being, well, animals don't have minds, so it's okay to treat them like machines. Now, interestingly or boringly enough, one of the things that sort of changed this view was not acceptance that animals have minds or souls, but the acceptance in science that these arguments apply to us as well. So if we're just organic machines and animals are just organic machines, then we're on par. So if the argument was, well, we have souls, animals don't, it's okay to do, to experiment on them, eat them, etc. But if it turns out we don't have souls, we're kind of the same as, roughly, as animals. So if it's wrong to harm us, it's wrong to harm them. So interestingly, it wasn't so much the elevation of animals, but kind of our, well, I can look at it as kind of our demotion, that we're regarded as being more equal by some today. And then, of course, Descartes died, and he's still dead today. Okay, so before moving away from Descartes, anything needs more stuff. I guess the question would be, is he right? Do animals, do they think? If so, how will we know? Because they don't talk. Unless you're Dr. Dolittle.
I saw a video on YouTube with this chimp.
Mm-hmm.
There were like ants in the
Was
tree.
that my video? Sorry.
No.
Bad joke. That was the class video. That's not a chimp, that's me.
No. It's like a stick, and he broke it, and then digged it into the tree and then took the ants out, and then was eating it. They're saying that he was using it as a tool. And in that same video, they had like a orangutan, like when they like climb and like swing on the trees, like I guess you can get like blisters. So they'll like wrap leaves around their hands and then use it to grip the branches. And they were saying that takes some kind of intelligence.
Yeah, it's a good point, because they do point, originally the idea was humans were the only tool users. Because we'd use sticks and spears. Yeah, the example you gave, they found out that they would, use the thing to get the ants and eat them. Apparently they're delicious. And, use other types of tools. And so the claim was, maybe they don't talk like us, but they do use tools. So that would show they have a degree, fairly high degree of intelligence. They've also done, they try to teach, chimpanzees, sign language, and they also have given them, they used to use like a keyboard type thing, and they would have the, adult gorilla or chimpanzee like type out stuff. And the claim was that, I think it was like called like Coco, and Coco would, like type out like Coco want, yogurt. And it seemed to be, because they don't have the vocal cords to speak. That's, if you're wondering, like, why can we speak, why can't animals? A big part of it is because we have vocal cords, which are pretty important to talking, and other animals don't, as far as we know. Now, what some scientists claimed is that the animal was actually using language, so they were communicating. They could form sentences and ask for things and say hello. Other scientists said, well, they're not using really, they don't really have language. They just learn if you do that, you get a yogurt. Kind of like, it's kind of like, Pavlovian conditioning. To use like an example, my husky, one thing I got, for some reason, I didn't realize this until later, but whenever I get like ice from an ice maker and get a drink, I would always give her like a treat or something, because my thought was, if I'm eating something, it's only fair that my husky gets something. And she now associates the ice maker with, wherever the ice maker goes, she runs to the kitchen, and she'll just sit in the kitchen waiting for food. So what I have to do is, like, even if I'm not in the kitchen, if like one of my friends does it, she'll go and sit there and wait. And then if my friend walks out, she just still sits there. And so I have to go and get a biscuit and give her the biscuit, because otherwise she'll just sit there and stare at the kitchen. And I guess she's got me trained too. And so the idea is that you can say, well, the dog doesn't really, it's just conditioned behavior. She's been conditioned to think that ice maker makes noise, food is coming. Or like with cats, like the can opener. When people have the can opener, the cat hears a can opener, they run for the food. They don't really understand can openers. The claim is they just are responding, by conditioning. And then, of course, people make the same argument about us, that we're just responding with conditioning. We're just more complicated. Another interesting test they've tried is the mirror test for self-awareness. Psychologists in the 70s developed this. And the idea is, if you have a person and you put like a mark on their face, well, you want to ask them first, but if they look at a mirror, what do? Put a mark across someone's forehead, they'll do this. They know it's them. And what they proposed was, well, one way to test to see if animals are self-aware is you put a mark on them and hold the mirror and see how they react to it. And they found that some animals, like elephants, react to the mirror. Most animals, like a bird, if you stick a mirror in front of a bird, what does the bird do? Yeah, it thinks it's another bird. I mean, one common thing is people get a mirror and they put it, if everyone like, why do they have mirrors in bird cages? What people claim is the bird thinks it's another bird, so they think they have company. That's what they claim. I don't know if that's true or not. But most animals, they don't react, they react to mirrors if it's another animal. They don't go, oh, that's me. Oh, they did have a golden retriever who she would look at herself in mirrors, and she would just stare in the mirror. And so I think she passed the mirror test, because I'm pretty sure she got that it was her. Because if you had a camera out, she would always pose. For real, you took the camera out, she'd immediately just go into pose mode. She'd stop what she was doing, just pull the ear, put the ears back, get the eyes going. And so I think she understood cameras and mirrors. So probably intelligent. The hypothesis was that she was a reincarnated person. So that was our working hypothesis, because it seemed. And whenever she was eating, she always would try to sit up in the chair. She would want to eat at the table. They didn't teach her that. That was not taught. And then driving. She's a really good driver. So reincarnation. No, the driving part's not true. She wasn't a very good driver.
I was going to say, what? I'm back here just listening.
Yeah, so maybe animals are intelligent, perhaps not. Okay, we now turn to our next to last reading, which is our good dead friend Immanuel Kant. Now, as you recall, back in the ancient days of part 2, Kant's a guy with a categorical imperative. So he believes, the idea that in terms of what you can do, action to maxima that counts at the same time will across one universal law. And we also talked about how the idea is that for Kant, stuff divides into rational beings, which have moral worth, and then everything else, non-rational beings, which he calls the objects for inclination. And I mentioned, or I believe I mentioned, which I may not, I guess there's tape evidence of that I had said that even though Kant presents animals as having no moral worth, that in his actual sort of theory about animals, his theory in some ways is, well, his view of animals is better than his moral theory would suggest. Because you may think, well, if animals are just objects, then it doesn't matter how we treat them. And what Kant, perhaps because he's, maybe because he's a nice guy, his view was, well, yeah, they're just objects, but we still should be nice to them. So he's consistent with that position. He does consider about our moral obligations. Do we have obligations to, or duties to animals? And Kant says the answer is no. We have no direct duties or obligations to animals. Why not? Well, his reasoning is this. Animals, he claims, are not rational. So, they are merely means to an end. Why? Well, this goes back to the, we were talking about the categorical imperative. They're rational beings who are capable of following the moral law or breaking it. They have intrinsic moral worth. Non-rational beings, they just do what they do. They simply follow the physical laws. And so they have no innate or intrinsic moral worth, or so he claims. So they are means to an end. And to try to argue for this, he says, we can ask the question, why do animals exist? Because that invites an answer about their purpose, which some would answer to be, put on, sesame seed buns with lettuce and tomato and special sauce, served beside some fries and maybe a little apple pie. And so his view is we can ask that question. But he claims, why does man exist, is a meaningless question. Which some may contend, that's not a meaningless question, but his reasoning seems to be, it makes sense to ask, what is the purpose of animals? What do they exist for? But in the case of us, he claims, we simply have intrinsic worth. He says the question has no meaning. Although it certainly seems to. But Kant, before he died, he was clearly much smarter than me, so maybe it does have meaning. So how is he going to get from animals are just things to you should be nice to them anyways? Because it seemed like the natural arc would be animals are just things, so it really doesn't matter what you do to them because they're just, stuff. And that the only reason you would have not to harm them would be like, say, personal feelings, or if the animal belonged to someone else. I mean, like something like my iPad has no moral status of its own. The only thing that sort of like protects it is that it's mine. So things done to the iPad don't do bad stuff to the iPad. Well, I mean, morally. But since it's mine, I could be wronged by busting my iPad. It's not a wrong against the iPad, but against me for busting my stuff. But how do animals get any status? Well, his answer is they don't, but they do, kind of. And here's how it kind of goes. Now, he does an argument by analogy here. He says, by doing, well, basically works like this, with the analogy. Suppose you have a dog. We'll call the dog Old Yellow. It's a very sad movie. If you haven't seen it, prepare to be sad. If you've seen it, you know what I'm talking about. So you get a dog, Old Yellow. Now, suppose you get a dog as long and faithfully served, its person. has been there, protected them, you know, been their friend, and the dog is getting old. And, you know, expensive to take care of, getting, you know, losing bladder, you know, the horrible things that happen to dogs as they get older. Now, Kant believes that the dog itself has no moral status. The dog is just an object, just a thing. But, again, Kant is better than this theory, because what he says is, if the dog has performed in ways that would obligate us to a human, suppose you had a friend or a relative, and they, you know, took care of you, treated you well, protected you, and now they're old, and they're getting a little, you know, little leaky, you know, they wear those dependents, and a little absent-minded. Well, you could save a lot of money by just taking them all back, and, you know, say, you know, poof, sorry, old yellow. You know, but that would be horrible. You know, we don't take our parents out back when they get a little old and, you know, shoot them. Hopefully we don't. And so he says, by analogy, we shouldn't treat our animals the same way. And so the question would be, well, why? If they're just objects, why shouldn't we do that? So that's a cliffhanger for today. When we return next time on Friday, we'll get the answer to that question, why you shouldn't shoot old yellow. Well, maybe old yellow, but not really old yellow.